Hey everyone, my name is Jake Smeester, Creative Content Specialist for Amazon Sumerian, and welcome to this episode, this stream on Twitch for Sumerian, where we're going to be discussing the new Sumerian scripting API. Let me throw up a title card there. The new Sumerian scripting API is currently in preview, and there's been a lot of requests, and if you monitor the Slack channel, for example, the former or the legacy API, there's a lot of questions and a lot of things that people were requesting for updates. And so as far as I understand it, which we will learn more here in a second, we just kind of rebuilt the whole thing. So to talk about that is CJ Kendall. He is a software development engineer at Amazon Sumerian. You are on camera.
Hello.
And so talk to us just a bit about what is the Sumerian API? What is new about it? Why did we redo it and build it? Give us kind of an overview of what we can expect from it.
Yeah, so one of the biggest advantage about the new scripting API, which is in preview, is that it's an obfuscation layer between the internal Sumerian code and what the customer interacts with. So what we can do with this new API is guarantee that it will remain consistent between minor version updates, which some customers may have experienced changes in the old legacy scripting API, and that's because that was not guaranteed to stay consistent between version updates. So consistency, so your scene doesn't change, your script doesn't change, is one of the major benefits. And along with that, we introduced a lot of cool features that are kind of exclusive to the new preview API, which will eventually be just the main API.
And so talk to us about what is the preview versus legacy. So right now, let me actually just jump over to my screen and show you all what I'm talking about. All right, so if I select, this is a demo that we actually recently created a video for, but that's not the point. I'm just going to add a component to this and add a script, and then we will add a new script. And you see there's two options, custom, there's two customs, but then a preview format and a legacy format. And so talk to us about kind of the status of, you said it's in preview, the other one's legacy. So what is going to be the difference eventually? Because we're obviously going to move this at some point from preview to standard, I would assume. And so what's going to be the difference? What's going to happen with legacy scripts? What are we going to do with those, or what can customers expect?
So legacy scripts won't be outright deprecated. They will continue to have the risk of them changing between minor version updates. So that's why we suggest customers start using the preview. The reason that the preview API is still in preview is that we're still making minor changes to it. Since we are kind of guaranteeing that it will remain consistent once it's the default, we want to make sure we've ironed out all the small things, added features that customers really want. So that's why it's still in preview. We're still kind of tweaking and making improvements to it. Once all those improvements are made, it'll come out of preview and it'll be the default scripting API, and it'll be guaranteed to remain consistent for the future.
Right, and another thing too is that there's a lot of tutorials out there that have the former or the old legacy scripting API, and we're in the process of kind of auditing our tutorials and kind of figuring out, okay, which ones are we going to update, which ones are we going to leave with the old scripting API. And so just note that there are some tutorials out there that use the legacy API, and we're working out kind of how to handle all the content, because there's a lot of scripts out there.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of figure out and let you know what, and it'll be pretty obvious. If it doesn't show that there are two options, assume that you need to go to the legacy API, for example. Anyway. All right. So today, what are we going to be looking at? What are you going to be showing us?
So today, I'm just going to be walking us through the quick start in the new API documentation, the quick start for the preview API. So we've got a couple example scripts in there that build on themselves, and they kind of they take a customer through all the different new features, and how the new API is formatted and how it works, because it is quite different from the old legacy system.
Cool. All right. So should we just jump into a demo?
Yeah, I think we can.
All right. So let's jump over to your screen.
So here I'm in a scene. I've already put these boxes in here, already written some scripts and stuff like that. We'll go over that in the future. But all these boxes have their own materials. This one is named box. and the ones in the back are responders 1, 2, and 3. We'll get into that later. But so I was talking about the new documentation. If you hit help in the top right corner and then hit scripting API, it'll take you to these new docs. And these docs both are mainly focused for the new preview API, but they do include references to the internal or legacy scripting functions and functionality. Today, in the guide, we're going to be looking at the quick start section. There's some other sections. There's a lot of information in here, and we're continually adding new things. Specifically, we also add what's new with the preview scripting API between engine versions. But today, we'll be going over the quick start section. And the first step is just to get a hello world working. So what this script is going to do is going to print hello world in the browser console. So here on the entity, we're going to add a script to it.
Would you mind actually just, sorry I didn't do this before, can you just increase the size of your screen?
Yeah.
Just by a bit. There we go.
That better?
That is better. Thank you.
So I've already written this script so I don't have to type in front of you. But this script, all it does, it exports a default function that prints hello world. I've added this to the box. I hit play. And now if I open the console, we'll see that hello world was printed. And for each time I run the script, it'll do that once. Here's another one. That's all it's doing. It's just hitting console.log hello world. It's a very simple script, but it's somewhere to start. And so what's happening here is this function is getting called. The exported default function gets called when the script is run. So in this case, all it's doing is just running standard JavaScript that you all are used to. I'm actually going to reload this page just to I hadn't done that before the stream started. So we go back to here. We're going to change out the hello world script for a basic rotate script. And we'll see the difference here is that instead of in hello world, which did console.log hello world.
And can you also, again, can you increase the size of that window there?
Yes, sorry about that.
There we go. My bad, everyone.
Yeah, no, totally. I want people to be able to see it. We're still exporting a default function. In this case, it takes in the context, which is how the script knows what's happening. It runs all the different functions. In this case, on the context start, it's going to run this action. So this is the rotate state machine action. You may be familiar with it using it in a state machine if you want to rotate an object. We're calling this in a script now instead of in a state machine. And we're giving it the rotation parameter, which is a vector 3 or an array of length 3 containing 3 numbers, the roll, the yaw, and the pitch, and this is in degrees per second. So our box, when this script starts, is going to rotate.
Another way to say that is it's rotating on the X, Y, and Z axis.
Correct.
Okay.
The initial X, Y, and Z of the box, yes.
So it's rotating it 100 degrees on each axis.
Yep.
And then
per second. So it'll continually rotate.
Okay.
And there's different options if you just want to rotate it 45 degrees and have it stop.
Mm-hmm.
That's also possible. In this case, I'm just going to have it continually rotate. And you also see from hello world to our rotate script, we're now importing something. We are importing the new API. So you'll see this will be almost a constant in all of the new preview scripts. Import star, so everything as S, stands for Sumerian, from the Sumerian Common API module. If we go back to the documentation, which you can also access by hitting the API references here for preview, you'll see this module. This is what we're importing. Sumerian Common /API contains a rotation namespace, and then inside of that is the rotate action. So if we follow that, we are in Sumerian Common /API, or S, which is much shorter, dot rotation. Again, we're in the rotation. And then rotate action. And so that's how you import actions and functions and classes in the new preview API. So if we run this script, what we'll see is the box is going to rotate. It's just going to rotate 100 degrees on each axis every second for perpetuity.
Nice. Okay, so I was answering a question there.
Yeah.
What happened to the boxes in the background? Did they looks like they changed color, right?
Yes, they did. It's actually a very good question. So there's something happening here with, we're going to go into that. The boxes are going to be changing color later. And for some reason, they are doing it now.
So it's not supposed to be happening.
In a later script it is, but it's doing it right now, which is a little odd.
Well, we'll probably debug that as we move along.
We probably will, and I think that actually may be the offender. Yes. So I had a state machine on this box, and that state machine we'll get to later, but it was the thing that was doing that. So what this script is doing is just this, what we're seeing now. So the box in the front is rotating 100 degrees on each axis.
Great.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I mean, I just wanted to clarify what everyone's seeing.
So that's actually our end goal, is something like that. So I'm going to remove the rotate script that we were using and go to the next.
And what's one thing to point out, I feel like, too, is that is a much simpler script. Am I correct? Than the legacy. If you wanted to get something to rotate,
yes,
that is a much simpler script than the legacy API would have required. Correct.
It is, and you can. It's simple for any state machine action. So we're using rotate as an example here, but
right.
As I'm sure customers are familiar with, there's a lot of state machine actions, and they all can be used in a similar manner that the rotate action is getting used.
Good to hear. Cool.
So we've done this rotate action. It's very simple. All it does is rotate the box. We're going to step it up a little bit and go to the custom actions section, which I will show you this script. It's very similar to the rotate action. You'll see that we're exporting a default function again, which takes in a context. It's the same import, but instead of starting an action in context.start in the default function, we are calling an action that we've defined on the next line, this enabled action. And this action also takes context. So this is context.start is passing the context down. And then when this action starts, it's going to call our same rotation action and also set the box to be red.
So it is essentially parenting actions in a hierarchy.
They're nested, yes. And we're going to expand on this relationship throughout these scripts, but this is the first kind of simple example. This action starts, which calls this action, which starts these actions.
Right. And what if you wanted to change the color from red to like a hex value?
So yeah, so you can provide any color as a type. It can take a multitude of different things. If we want to look at the documentation for that, again, we're going to go to Sumerian Common API /s.color. So we're going to go to color. And here's all of the defined colors.
Okay.
And we also see what color is defined as, which is a vector 3. A vector 3 of R, B, and G.
Right.
R, G, and B, sorry. So that's how you would define a color in that format of red, green, blue. Right now. So we could change this to lime. And now, if I take our custom action script, apply it to the entity, and then run it, we made a rotating box that is lime instead of red because I changed it. So it's just going through. It's calling this, which is calling this, which is calling both of these actions. Now, if we keep going through the scripting API quick start guide, we're going to look at states. So this is where that hierarchy of actions starts to get a little bit more complex, and allows you to do a lot more with it. So that's the state script over here. You'll see that we're exporting the default function. We changed the name of it, but that doesn't matter. Ignore this commented out thing for a section. We're going to go into that in a bit.
Okay.
But now, instead of just calling context.start, we're calling context.states, giving it an initial state, and all of the parameters are in the documentation. So if you have any questions about that, you can consult the new docs. But in this case, the default state is going to be off, and the off state is going to call the enabled action, and the on state is going to call the enabled. So disabled is off, on is enabled. Sorry, I may have said that wrong the first time around. Just like in the custom action script, we're defining the action, and it's going to start. It's going to set it to be green when it's disabled, and on click. So this is when we're bringing in kind of a different type of state machine action that has an input. On the click, we're going to change the controller, which is the states controller up here, to the on state, which will then call the enabled action, which will set the color to red. It will rotate the box, and then on a click, it'll set it back to off, and they'll loop back and forth whenever you click. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we're going to remove the old script, add states as a script, and start it. So it's just green, and right now it's waiting for a click. And when I click, it changes to a red box, and it starts rotating. And now it's listening for the click to move it back to the off state. And we can just click through that, and they'll just keep looping through. This is a super simple example of a controller, of a states controller between two different states. But you can kind of see where we're going. There's a lot of control there in how you can go between actions, which you can't do simply in a state machine.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the state machine has a lot of, it has a lot of useful benefits, especially for people that aren't, that this is new to. And
Exactly.
Like JavaScript is foreign. But there certainly are limitations because currently a state is limited to being in one state at a time. It can't be doing multiple things. I mean, you can send out messages to have other state machines, but then it gets really complicated in terms of adding state machines upon state machines, and it becomes a little more difficult. So where you can actually just, as far as I understand, you can really start combining actions all into one script.
Correct. And even in a case where you want to message between different things, it's all in one place. It's all in this one script. Versus you're going to be dealing with multiple state machines and how they're interacting, and are they on the same entity? Are they on a? There's further complications that happen when you have to do this with just a state machine.
Yeah. So while they're easier and more,
there's a lower bar to entry.
Yeah. That's
just on they're graphical.
Yeah, it's node based. It's very visual, but at the same time, when you start getting like 100 state machines, it can be pretty overwhelming too. So
yeah, even just to follow the lines can get confusing.
Right. There's pluses and minuses. Okay. Back to your screen.
Another thing, and this is going back to that commented outline that we had. Another great part about the scripting API versus the state machines, where you could build this in a state machine, you don't have the ability to trace what's happening. So by setting context dot _ trace _ to true, when we run, I'm going to open the console, the developer console, because we're going to see some stuff here. When we run the script now, again, it works just as it did before. There's a small performance impact of tracing, but everything still functions as normal. But when we look at the console.log, you can see there's a really verbose what's happening. So we're coming into the rotator action, and then context is going to the disabled action because this is the first state. So we're going to off. The disabled action is setting the material color, and it's setting up a click listener, and then you can actually see what those actions are doing inside of themselves. On click, we're then transitioning, and you can just go through your entire flow of what happened. And if something's doing something that you aren't expecting, you can kind of figure out why that is happening. Where with a state machine, or even with the legacy scripting API, it was very tough to figure out what actually happened when your script or state machine ran.
Right. You can always, with the state machines, you can like look
between states.
Yeah, you can look to see where it is, and you can look at the console to kind of get an idea of like what kind of errors are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
But you don't know what actions
Right.
we're executing, which order, which action. It's
Right.
tougher to follow, and you have to look at these state machines. It's not persistent. Once you go to the next state, you've lost the information on the state machine. Where here,
true.
it'll just track everything that happens. So that's one of the fun features that isn't. That's just one of the new things that we've added to the scripting API. Now that I've gone after that, we're going to look at properties. So this is how you provide values to a script. So if you notice, this is our state script that we were just running. It doesn't have any parameters. So there's no way for you to change it without going into the script, which is not great if you're sharing scripts, because someone may not understand where they need to change the values. So if we use this script, you'll see that we have 4 different colors that we can provide, and they open up the color selector. We could change it to teal if we wanted to. Now let's look at this. What in the scripting API is causing this to appear and how it's being used. So there's big properties. That's what is defining these properties that we're seeing. We have the off color, the low color, the medium color, and the high color. The names are camel case, and then they're getting split up into this name. So that's how it works with the camel casing. It adds a space before the capital letter.
Can you define real quick camel case?
Camel case. So that's just the start of each new word is a capital letter. So color is the second word, so C is capitalized.
Right.
And it has a type, so it's a vector 3 because that's what a color is. The control is what gives us that little color box. And there's lots of different controls. These are documented in the new documentation.
Okay.
But this is just one of them. It's the best way to provide a color value.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can actually see the color. You can see the hex that you talked about earlier.
Right.
Or you can just give the RGB values. The default, which we changed it from black to that teal. And then the order which they're displayed. So in this order, off, low, medium, high. 0, 1, 2, 3. If you don't provide an order, it'll just take it first as in the object. So in this case, it'd be the same order, but it's nice to be able to include that if you want certain things to be grouped together. If we actually look at, now that we've provided those values, we'll look at how we're using them. Again, we're exporting a default function. In this case, it's a sequence controller, not a state controller. So instead of going from on to off to on to off, it's going to go in a sequence. So it's going to go from the first state to the next state to the next state to the next state. And then since we've set it to loop, it'll loop back to the first state. And in those here, you can see options.offColor is going to be what the customer or what is the default value is provided through that property. Options.lowColor, they'll correlate to what these values are coming in. So that's how you use that value. In this case, it's going to just change the colors as we click through the actions in the very similar way. And then it's also going to do an increasing rotation for 3 of the 4. The first will not rotate, it'll just set the color. And then here is our click action, which takes the controller to the next state. So that's what's progressing through those 4 states and then looping back. So if we run this, it's that teal. I clicked once, it's the next state, to the next state, to the next state, and back to the start. And we can just loop through, continually through. Each time I'm clicking, it's going to the next state. And that's kind of an example of properties and how to provide values here instead of having to hard code them into the script.
Nice. I am curious about, I don't think you've mentioned this yet, the different colors. the colors in the actual the text editor
Yeah.
of scripts. I know you were talking about colors in a different way, but just on the subject of colors.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned before, I think, or at least when we were talking the other day, that you have changed the way in which different words and functions actually get colored in the script text editor. Am I right about that?
There has been some improvements to make the text editor more compatible with the preview scripting versus, because it's a different format, so you want different things to be highlighted and different meanings versus in this type of JavaScript versus the legacy scripting API. And then there's improvements that can be had there, and we're actively working on, again, it's in preview, so we are making improvements to how the text editor displays information for the preview API.
All right. Okay, so I'm going back to your screen.
Yeah.
So right now it's spinning and changing colors.
Yep, and changing rotation rates.
Right.
But again, so
right.
We're just going through different actions. The next step is going to be entity sets. So those 3 boxes in the back are going to get involved. So I'm going to change the script from the properties script to the entity set script, and we'll show you the difference here. Again, you see it has its own properties, and then an additional property for responder, which are going to be these 3 boxes in the back. So if we look at entity sets are a new feature in the preview scripting API, in the new API. And it's a way to get a set or group of entities that exist in the world based on a shared value. So in this case, this is very similar to the properties if you look at it. One of the differences is we have this line here where we are getting entities with names, and then there's a regular expression here that is responder and then a number. So in this case, we have responder 1, responder 2, responder 3. All of these fit within this regular expression, so they will all be added to this entity set responders. So we are able to apply the responder action to all of the responders with this maintain function, and pass a value, which in this case is that blue color, which we're providing here, options.responder color. And if we look at responder action, it calls actions, which is set the material color. It's a popular one with these scripts. So there's no script on any of these 3 boxes. But when we execute the script, it's going to set the color to be blue. And so we can now apply scripts to a whole separate entity than the one that the script is on. And you'll see that it rotates just like the old rotation action. But the change here is we're applying actions to a different entity doesn't have a script on it. And we're doing that with entity sets. We can change it. So let's say instead of using the name, we want to use the tag system, which if we look at responder 1, it has a tag foo. Responder 2 has foo and bar, and responder 3 has bar. So we're going to get all the entities with tag bar, which are 2 and 3. And now you notice that only those 2 turn blue because we've changed what's in that entity set. Following entity sets are shared values, which we will change that script out. Go back to box because we only want to apply scripts to box. We're not doing anything with responders.
We do have a question in the chat.
Yes.
In the chat, excuse me. I'm just curious what I responded to it, but I'm curious what your response is. Folks are asking, does this need some prerequisite knowledge? What are your thoughts on, like, what do you need to know to get started with Sumerian scripting to begin with?
I think a basic, and I'm saying basic, experience with JavaScript will be very useful just so you understand the mechanics of what's happening. But we've actually taken action to even lower that bar from a more advanced level required. We've lowered that in the last couple of weeks of making changes that simplify it and use less JavaScript specific knowledge. So there's not a lot of prerequisite required, much less than the legacy scripting API.
Right. Good. Yeah, I mean, and there's, to understand like what we're talking about specifically today, I'm answering a question from Amit underscore Microsoft underscore India, asking like what prerequisites do you need to know? To kind of follow along what CJ's talking about today, like understanding a little bit about Sumerian is kind of important.
Yes.
I mean, it's we're not going over anything too complicated, and there's a lot of documentation out there to kind of cover it. But if you are brand new to Sumerian and you're like watching this stream, having some prerequisite of kind of both JavaScript and Sumerian editor and like what it is to begin with would be helpful. But let me post our tutorial site in the chat room, which will help, I think. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Back
and
to you.
One thing you said there was the documentation. I think customers will find that the new documentation that you can view by hitting API reference preview in the script editor or the referencing in the editor itself, it's got a lot more detail. It's got a lot more examples. So again, if you don't have the knowledge about the Sumerian specific components, that documentation is much improved, and we'd love to get more feedback on it to improve it even further. But it really helps versus the old documentation. There's a lot more there to help you get over that hump of what is the rotate action.
It's quite improved,
yes.
I would say.
We're quite proud of it.
Good. Great. So let's see. Back to your screen. Where did you leave off?
So I've gone from the entity set section to the shared value section. And so what this is going to do is I'll just run the script. You see that all three jumped up in the background, and then on the next click, they jumped up again, and they jumped up even further. So we're still setting the color. Let me stop that. We're still setting the color the same way as the entity set script. It's very similar. We're still calling that, responder action. But instead, if you see in the responder action, there's this off position, low position, medium position, high position, and they are controlled with in this controller, and that's what's going up, 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 and back down. But if you notice, there's nothing here progressing to the next step. There's nothing saying, go higher up, go higher up. What's happening is there's a signal status, which is triggering that change, and that's that shared value. And if we look at status again, responder action is taking it. And when the responder action is created, we're giving it status, which is the rotation status, which is what we've been using to progress through the rotation of the box in the front. So we're now sharing that value between the box in the front and the three in the back to do different actions, but using the same value. So you can be guaranteed that when something happens on the front box, something can happen on a different thing, and you're using the same value. You don't have to be sending a message or anything like that. It's just a shared value. And it's a really great system of how to get something between different kind of sections. You can have these shared values that can go across boundaries.
Right. So if and when users get like more comfortable with this, it'll speed up development time.
Definitely. We've gotten feedback internally that people, are able to do things that they didn't really think would be feasible, just due to the complexity that would have been required with the old system. There's a lot of things that allow them to take what would be a couple, 100 lines into 2 or 3. Just on especially entity sets are another great way to get, one example, you have a bunch of enemies in a game, and you want to do something to all those enemies. You can just get all of them by getting an entity set using a tag or an attribute. You could even, apply it. Let's say you only want to apply things to enemies with health below 3. You can do that. You can get all those entities in the world that have an attribute value less than 3.
Right.
Which is getting that before would be fairly complex.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Great. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Back to your screen.
Sure. Yeah. And so now we've gone through all of the script examples, kind of building up this script that rotates one box and makes the stuff in the back move. That script is now complete. That's kind of going through all the different things we have. What we're going to do now is integrate that script into a state machine with signals. So we're going to create a state machine. I'm going to take this behavior that I created before and show it to you. What it is, it's a state that has an execute script action, and it's executing the signal script, which I'll show you in a second. And then on success, it's calling a shake action, which will shake the box in the front around a little bit. And then when that's done, it'll go back to the script. So that script, it's almost identical to the shared value script. If we click between it, you'll see the one difference, which is the signal that we were defining. In this case, we're defining on success. And again, it's taking the camel case name and changing it to the displayed name, but it's got a description as well, which will happen if you hover over it over here, if it wants to do it. The hover over it doesn't work that well on my laptop for some reason. But this signal gets, when the script is done, the signal gets triggered, and when the time's up, it signals this signal, which will then transition to a different state. This state could contain another script, or it can contain just a state machine action.
What is the difference between signals and the system bus, or emitting and listening to messages?
They are related. Signals in this case we're using to transition between states in the state machine editor.
Okay.
You could also use signals to send messages across your script or between different, they are based upon the system bus messages, but it's a more polished system that also integrates well into the state machine editor. So for some of the customers that may have an existing state machine that's fairly complex, and you want to integrate the new preview scripting API into that state machine, this is one of the ways you can do it just as a single action in the greater state machine.
Right. But but it sounds to me like there's something with like listening and something being emitted and something being listened here. So it's like, what is the difference between that? It just is more, you can do more with it, I guess is the question.
You can do more with it. There's more, the system bus message was part of the internal or legacy scripting API. And so there may be in the future, but just like as a potential, there may be changes there. We may find a better way to do system bus messages or something like that. With Signal, and there's a matching listener that you can find in the documentation.
Right.
You're guaranteed, you don't know exactly what's sending the messages and what's listening for the messages. But what we're telling you is that this is going to send a message, and this listener will listen for that message. We don't care what system's being used underneath. We're just guaranteeing, we're telling you that this is going to continue to work in the future.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool.
And there's cool stuff you can do with signals specifically, which could be a whole different Twitch stream.
Right. And is that in the documentation? Do signals have like it's a unique section you can point to?
Yeah. So here we're using the searches. And so there's all the signals defined there. There's a signal for entity sets. Here's a monitor action. So this is an action that monitors an entity set and sends a signal when entities are added and removed. And
does that conclude the?
There's one
demo?
last example.
Okay. Cool.
Which I'm just going to run this that we've been talking about, but I'll actually show you what it is. We click through all the same states, but then after that time up is done, it changes to the shake action, and now we're back into the script once that's done.
Cool.
So that's the script interacting with the state machine action.
Right. Gotcha. Very cool. Well, thank you. CJ. Does that conclude the demo?
That is the end of the quick start. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for doing that. We also, just because we're running low on time, we're gonna have Mike Deem, our principal engineer. He's been answering a couple questions in the chat room. He's gonna jump on and address a couple things, clarify some things, answer some questions.
Well,
so
no, I just wanted to clarify some of the stuff you were saying about you can. Yeah, what you were describing the signals are the values, and the signals are callbacks that are used for the state transitions, and then we have the value accessors which provide the notifications. So just clarifying some of the terminology there. Yeah. Just so no one's confused.
Gotcha. Would you mind sitting just a little bit closer to the microphone there?
Yep.
All right, so this is my team, and let's see. Let me switch over to his title in 1 second. All right, all live. Thanks, Mike, for joining. Just kind of a recap. What are some of the things that can customers kind of expect from this scripting API? And CJ answered this. I just also want your input. Mm-hmm. What can customers expect from this scripting API and documentation that they could not with the documentation before?
Yeah, so TJ highlighted that one of the goals with the new API is to make it a lot easier to use the state machine actions. Mm-hmm. So we're essentially investing in those actions, improving state machines in general, making those actions available from scripts, encapsulating complex things. So somebody mentioned on chat when we were talking about the rotate action, they said no quaternions. And so, you know, how many people actually know what a quat is and what it's used for when doing 3D rotations? And, you know, so that's very specialized knowledge, and you shouldn't have to know how to do 3D math, or, in our opinion, in order to make a box rotate on the screen. Mm-hmm. And the visual state machine in Sumerian provides that layer of abstraction that wasn't available to scripts, and now it is fundamentally what's going on there. But and then, as CJ also pointed out, as you know, state machines have limits. As things get more and more complex, they get harder and harder to manage. Mm-hmm. So,
right, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to start jumping into it myself, and even just having you explain some of this stuff is just so helpful. So, thank you for joining. It looks like we have answered all the questions in the chat room. We are at about 45 minutes, so I think that's good. Thank you both for joining. Any last thoughts? Last questions? You want to answer? No? Good? 1, 2. All right, good. That's it. Thank you all for joining. Let's see. We will be back. We're scheduled to be back at the end of the end of October, but just make sure you follow the events on the Twitch events page, and to be updated with what we have what we have coming up, and also in the Slack channel, slack.sumerian.world. Make sure you're joining there. I will also throw up some of the documentation site here right at the very end. Thanks for joining, and we will see you next time. All right. Thanks again. And where's the docs? There it is. Boom.
And one last thing about those docs.
We are back. Come on over
Sorry
here.
About that.
Come on over here.
One last thing about those docs is there's the what's new section in those docs that will be updated as new things are added in preview. So before we go final, that's where you can kind of find new things, changes, small incrementations.
So let me just jump to my screen.
Yeah.
Nope, that's your screen. My screen. Okay, so help, scripting API. Let's just point this out.
And then what's new on the left.
What's new right here. Okay, cool. So yeah, everything that is updated and new, that's a really great point. Cool, so make sure you're checking that out for updates. All right, that's it. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.